All right, so I'm going to test to make sure that the live stream is working and that we're broadcasting. Restart this. The last live stream that I did. I'm gonna make sure that we're still. Still live. Okay, it sounds like we've got audio and video there. That's great. So today we're going to talk about the meaning and value of work. I mentioned this before, if you want to volunteer to earn some extra credit points, which I imagine after the first exam some of you do, next week on Thursday and Friday we have some opportunities. If you'll send me an email, I need you to commit to probably at least, like 2 hours of your time, either Thursday or Friday. Let me know if you're available either of those days and you want to earn some extra credit points. I will have an opportunity for you to go to Loves and work at CSI. It's also an opportunity for you to go through the career fair and make connections and talk to companies. And if you're not a sales student, understand why you might want to become a sales student, because they're going to try and tell you how much money they have and what the benefits are of the companies. So you'll have that opportunity. So let me know. Yes, ma'am.
So you'll be working CSI?
You'll be I need you to be in professional or business casual dress, but yeah, I'll have a list of things that people can do. And I will, based on sort of what we need, it may be things like working to help us knock on doors to make sure that the timing is correct. So that's one of the things that, because I've got 8 doors that I've got to knock at the same time to get everybody. So it would be something like that. It's not going to be terribly taxing. So let me know. Adam, I need to see you after class. I have a question for you. Cooper, since you weren't in class last night in Bob's class, I have a question for both of you. So if you guys would just see me after class, I'd appreciate that. So we're going to talk today about the meaning and value of work. And this is a marketing class. The title of the class is Marketing Ethics. And so you are sitting there thinking, why are we talking about what is really a human resources topic that should be in a management class? There is a recognition now that marketing, because again, this should come tripping off your tongue after you've had one of my classes, marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. What does that mean? It means that marketing seeks to add value across all aspects of the firm and ensure that we are completing our mission to our constituents, right? So marketers not only work with the internal aspects of the firm, we have to work with accounting, for example, to get the numbers, to figure out, what kind of our budget we have and where we're going to be able to, use those resources to impact ultimately constituency satisfaction. We also have to work with other employees in the firm. And there's a recognition that we need to engage in helping other employees across the firm do something called live the brand. So this has become a topic in marketing scholarship. How do you get employees to live the brand? What is a difference between somebody who just goes to work and it's a negative experience for them, but they have to, sort of make a living and feed their family, or in the words of the second President Bush, I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family. He was a master of the English language. I mean, just could mangle the Queen's English faster than anyone I've ever seen. But looking back, it was rather charming, compared to the last president that we had, not the current, but the last one. I mean, he was even a worse mangler of the English language than George W. Bush's were quaint by Trumpian standards, right? What was one of them? There's a lot of uncertainty that's not clear in my mind. What? People have a tendency to misunderestimate. Right. Okay.
Right.
So, living the brand. How do we get employees to live the brand? So this is internal marketing. Why do we want employees to live the brand? Well, because if they live the brand, everything that we do is going to make the customer experience or the constituent experience better. And it's going to add value. So even in human resources, this internal marketing that we have to do. So we're going to talk about the meaning and value of work today. So what is a great job or a meaningful job? Are they the same thing? Are great jobs the same thing as meaningful jobs? In one version of the textbook, and I used this one a long time ago because I think it highlights some things. There was a football player named Pat Tillman who played for the Cardinals. And after 9/11, he left an exceedingly lucrative career in professional football to go into the US Army and serve in the US Army. And he didn't come back. He was killed in service. Why would somebody do that? Why would they give up their life? You know, give up their career, where if you think about if he had lived and he had continued to play, he probably would have been able to provide not only for himself, but for his children and future generations for years and years to come. Why would you do that? Well, because there's something about that kind of work for him that provided more than just a means to an end. It wasn't just a transactional relationship for him. The common assumption is that work is something that we do simply as a means to an end. But it's got to be more than that for a lot of us. I gave up. Now I make, as a marketing professor, I make a lot of money compared to some other professors on campus. I started out as a political scientist. I have people over there, they're primarily retired now, but when I became a marketer, some of the people that I was colleagues with over there wouldn't because they viewed my choice to become a marketer as being completely transactional and a means to an end. And they didn't understand why I would, choose this career path over one in which it was a sort of traditional academic discipline. Marketing as an academic pursuit is a relatively modern phenomenon. As a human activity, marketing has ancient roots. But as an academic pursuit, it has its origins at the beginning of the 20th century as an academic study. So there's this view that, this conventional view of work as this is just a means to an end. But that's changed, and particularly among your generation and younger, that we now have 5 or 6 generations, depending on who you listen to, working in the workforce. The views of work that developed in the Industrial Revolution and before in the 20th century are changing in the 21st century. We're seeing more and more disruption in the workforce and ideas about what it means to work. When I was growing up, my grandmother, and I've told you all this story, I think, before, was the classified records librarian for the Sandia National Lab. So it was part of the Manhattan Project. Her husband, my grandfather, had been employed by them. He had a heart attack at a very young age. He was 36 years old. My mother was 7 years old at the time. And the head of the corporation came to her and said, Tunny, that's what they called her. Her name was Carlston. Her father had a perverse sense of humor. He named all of his daughters. He had been in World War I, and he named all of his daughters after people he served with, their last name. So he served with a guy whose name was Carlson, so he named my grandmother Carlson. Nobody could pronounce that apparently, so she went by Tunny. He had a Rammy, which was another guy that was in his unit. That was my aunt, my great aunt's name. But anyways, the president said, Tunny, we have a job for you. Companies don't do that anymore. If you die, they're not going to go to the widow and say, we've got a job for you. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was. Sorry.
Okay, you didn't have a question. All right. They didn't, in the modern era, in the contemporary era, don't have that kind of loyalty. What we've seen is we've seen far more, and particularly among your generation, people engaging in contingent work, short time assignments rather than long-term stable employment. And this has been brought about by things like corporate downsizing. So these traditional views of work, we have sort of this bipolar view of it. There's this traditional means-end reasoning for some kinds of work. There's also a recognition that, you can achieve great things in your work. So there's this dichotomy between feeling that we have glory in our work, we achieve things, and we achieve recognition and satisfaction in work, versus contempt of work. Like, this is something I have to endure in order to get to the weekend. So the challenges are for us as marketers, and in trying to get people to live the brand, is to come up with work that is just and fair, recognizing that not everyone is going to have meaningful work and humane. How do we do that? How do we come up with these ideas of work that are just, fair, and humane in a contemporary world in which not everybody is going to have a meaningful job? Well, I guess we have to start with, first of all, what are the different types of work that we can have? In Habits of the Heart, Bella and his co-authors come up with sort of 3 types of work. At the bottom level is just a job, just your basic job. This is characterized by employees whose identities are distinct from, and in often case divorced from, the activity that they engage in to make money. And the example I always use is, I don't know anybody who says it's my lifelong dream to be a garbage collector. Although after reading your essays, and wanting to stab my eye out from the pain of having to read some of them, I kind of think, riding around in a garbage truck, this isn't a bad job anymore. Like, they don't get out, they don't have to pick up the garbage. In the olden days, there were 2 guys that rode around on the back of the truck. Like, the prime position was to be the driver because you didn't have to get out. But there were these 2 guys that rode around on the back of the truck, and they would have to pick up heavy garbage cans, which are, people are, not necessarily like careful in placing their trash in the receptacle, and it was dirty, and you'd have to pick up the can and actually dump it into the back of the truck. They don't do that anymore. They ride around, and the truck has this arm. All of the containers are exactly the same. That was a big problem in the past, is that everybody had different kinds of containers, and they'd set them out at the curb, and you'd have to pick them up, and they'd overload them. Now there's this arm that grates out, picks it up, and dumps it, and you just ride around. And it pays about $30,000 a year to do this. That after I have to read essays, that sounds like not a bad gig. Just ride around the city all day and pick stuff up. Most people don't want to do that. Even as good a job, it's now air conditioned. You're in an air conditioned cab. You're not out in the heat or in the cold anymore. They don't want to do that. Most of what you want to do is you want to have a career, and that's why you're sitting here in marketing ethics at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, listening to me, yap at you, is because you want something where there is a connection, there is a nexus between the activity that you do and the thing that you get from it, which is a paycheck. Right? It's not just a paycheck. Most of you want to have something that's meaningful and in which your identity is somewhat attached to. And I tell students, one of the first things that people ask you when they meet you is, what do you do for a living? It's not because they care about you. It's not because they're interested. They're not. Most people are not interested in, particularly we know among your generation that it's less so than maybe previous generations. The reason they ask that question is because it's an instant way of pegging you on the social ladder, right? So we can figure out exactly where you are. When somebody says, I'm a doctor, that has a lot more prestige to it than saying, I'm the trash collector, right? So there's some connection between what you're doing and your identity in a career. That's what most of you want. You want to have a career. You want not just to make money, but you want something that's meaningful, that provides you with a sense of identity and accomplishment. That's why you are getting a college degree. If you went back in time to the founding of the first secular institution of higher education in the world, which was actually not that long ago, the idea of the founding of that institution, the founder of that institution, was not one that wanted to grant degrees. So what was the first, anybody know what was the first secularly founded institution of higher education in the modern world? Now, you could make an argument, and why I say the modern world, you could make an argument that if you went back to classical antiquity, that Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum were secular. And we've talked about why that is, because the Greeks didn't have a system of religion, which we call mythology now. We consider the Greek religion to be myth, that was terribly satisfactory in answering these questions about the question of knowledge, conduct, and governance, right? But the first modern institutions of higher education were attached primarily in the beginning with the oldest of the first three professions. So when we talk about professional status, one of the things marketers want is we want to become professionals, which is one of the reasons why you're taking this class. Because if you're going to be afforded professional status by societies, professional status is something that society recognizes as being a profession, you're going to have to act like a professional. And acting like a professional requires ethics. That's part of it. So the oldest of these the three original learned professions that were what we organized institutions of higher education around, the oldest of these was theology. So institutions of higher education largely popped up to support the transmission of knowledge for the clergy. So institutions of higher education were sponsored by the church originally, in sort of not the classical antiquity form, but in what we would recognize as the modern form. They're largely sponsored by the church. So they were used to promote the transmission of knowledge of the Bible to the clergy. Then the second oldest profession, which is law. So, and this was closely tied for many, many years because the church and state were not separate for most of human history, for most of the history of the Western civilization. The church and state were not separate. Once the Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, that became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so we get this mixing of the church and state. The Holy Roman Emperor was crowned, for example, by the Pope. And then the third became medicine. That was the third learned profession. Now we've got others that we've added to the learned professions, but those are the three oldest. So you want a career. The highest form is a calling. This is one in which the identity of the individual is completely a part of the activity that they perform. As an attorney, that's what I view my profession as. It's not just a career, it's a calling. When you become an attorney, unless you are disbarred, you are an attorney 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are subject to the rules of professional responsibility, whether or not you are engaging in the practice of law. You can be held accountable for your actions outside of the practice of law. There are things you can do to get yourself disbarred or punished, even if it doesn't affect your clients as a lawyer. You are always subject to the rules of professional responsibility, which is one of the things that the Trump lawyers are figuring out as they're being disbarred for lying. Not necessarily to the court. Some of them are being punished for lying to the public, for promoting false claims. You lie on television as a lawyer, you can be disbarred. Doesn't have to be to the court. You lie to the public, you can be disbarred. There is no distinction between the activity that I pursue and my identity. It is a calling. The clergy is a calling. You are always, once you become a minister, the Reverend so-and-so, unless you, I guess, decide you don't believe anymore. Yes, why?
So how do you know the difference between you just have a good career that's busy and then a calling?
In most of your instances, you're going to have a career, which there's going to be a connection between what you do, but it's not all that you are. You don't view it completely. Everything I do, I view in terms of I'm an attorney first and foremost. In everything that in teaching this class, you don't think that I necessarily have a lot of, sort of legal obligations with regard to that. But, I view that as, there are lots of things that I can't do that maybe I'd like to do that are gonna, cost me my law license. So the first thing that comes out of my mind every time I have an interaction with somebody is, is this gonna cost me my law license if I do that? When students fall asleep in my class, I would really, I would love to shoot you. I have a concealed carry permit. I am highly entertaining. Somebody wrote on my student evaluations, "You're not very funny." Well, that's just not true. That's just a lie. I'm hysterical. I would like to shoot you. That'll lead to disbarment. I have another colleague who, I had to, when I was associate general counsel, I had to go talk to her because when students would fall asleep in her class, she would throw erasers at them. She'd just pick up an eraser. And these were when we had blackboards. Those erasers, I don't know if you remember blackboard, this eraser, this is not going to hurt you. If I throw this at you, it's going to be moderately embarrassing, particularly if I have good aim, but it's not going to hurt you. The old blackboard erasers, those were heavy. That's what we had. We had these chalkboards forever and ever, and her name was Beverly Thornton. She talked like this. And if you fell asleep in her class, she just picked up an eraser and she just chucked it at your head. I'd like to do that. It's not killing you. It's not shooting you. Again, that's called assault and battery. Maybe just battery. I say something to you first, it's assault. And then when I throw it, it's battery. Right? That's against the law. What happens if I do that? I'm disbarred. Although we had one legal studies professor who stabbed a student with a pencil. I tried to fire him. You know, couldn't fire him. Also tried to get him disbarred. I don't know, the bar at that time didn't seem to think that was too bad. I think they think it's a big deal now. Right? Like there are things you can do that are automatic suspensions from the bar. Assault and battery is one of them.
When was this?
You know, it's when I first started. So I started here, started working for UCO in like 1995, before most of you were born, right? So, you know, like I can't do that. So there's going to be some connection between you. Like you're gonna say, you know, I'm a sales manager at Gartner, or I'm a sales professional at you know, Tom James or Love's or something, and you're gonna have some identity with that. But it's not, you're not gonna think, you know, if I spank my kids in the Walmart, is this, you know, gonna lead to bad results at Love's? Probably not. Like if I do that, I don't have children, thank God. Praise the Lord. That'd be bad. Can you imagine another me running around? No. Tragic, toe-tappingly tragic, toe-tappingly tragic. So Colin, like I have to think about everything that I do in terms of I could lose my law license. Every single thing I do, like, you know, that's a calling. But for most of you, you're going to have this connection between what it is you do. You're going to want work that's meaningful. For those of you that are sales, you're going to want to find products that you believe in. When I went into the corporate world, I went to work for an educational software publisher because, you know, I couldn't go to work for Philip Morris or something like that. I don't believe in selling cigarettes. As much as I used to smoke, I recognize that they're not good products. So I had to find something that I could, you know, at least find some value in, that I appreciated what it was that we were selling. So the value of work. There's the instrumental value. The instrumental value is the wages and the benefits that you receive. This is the transactional value. You go to work and you do a job because you want to make money and you also want good benefits. That's a big part of work today. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, it was enormously important. Most people needed to go to work in order to have health insurance, particularly if you had something called a pre-existing condition, when private health insurers could deny you benefits based on that pre-existing, or they could exclude that pre-existing condition, which meant for most of you, like if you had something, you know, like HIV, well, they were going to exclude all the drugs. They can't do that anymore. But it's still an enormously important part of why we go to work every day. I enjoy the fact that UCO provides healthcare benefits, that they have disability leave and things like that. And then with regard to anything above a job, we're going to talk about the psychic goods that you get from your job or from your career, or your calling, not your job, but your career, your calling. What are these psychic goods? When we ask students and when we ask employees, what are the primary things that motivate them in terms of work? Wages are always, or salary is always somewhere, depending on which survey you look at in terms of worker satisfaction, it's always somewhere between about 7 and 15, except for one profession. Anybody want to guess what that one profession is that rates it higher? Huh?
Nursing?
No. Do you think most nurses go into, I'll give you a duck since you took a shot at it, but you think most nurses go into it for the money? It is good money now. Historically, it wasn't. Historically, nursing was not. I mean, it was, if you go back in the past again, and it wasn't that long ago, for example, when my mother went to college, her mother said, you can either become, because that's what her mother had done, she was a teacher, and that's how she became classified records librarian. She had a master's degree, and she had been a teacher and a librarian for a school district. And so historically speaking, the professions that were open to women were clerical, nursing, and teaching. And so my mother wanted to go and become a lawyer, and her mother said, well, you're gonna get a teaching degree first, because you can always fall back on a teaching degree. And historically, nursing, because it was a female profession or dominated by females, it was not paid very well. It's paid pretty well now because we need them. Like, there's a big shortage. Anytime, this is a supply and demand issue. If you go back to the 1940s or 50s, you know, we didn't have as many medical technologies. Basically, people died pretty early. Why was Social Security? Why did they choose 65 as the retirement age for Social Security? People died. That was about the life expectancy of most people at the time. So it was like, you know, you'll get to 65 and we may have to write you a couple checks, but you're probably going to die. And Social Security was what we call actuarially sound at that point. Social Security is becoming less and less actuarial sound. Students ask me if Social Security will be there when they retire. Yes, it will be there. I will tell you why it will be there. Old people vote. And you talk about taking something away from them, and by God, they will turn out. I mean, they will show up with pitchforks and rakes at the polls. My grandmother, God rest her soul, was a lifelong Republican. Ronald Reagan threatened to not end Social Security, to modify it so that people like her received less of a benefit. She outlived 2 husbands. She got both of their pensions and she had her own. She had 3 pensions that she drew and Social Security. She didn't need Social Security, but by God, that was her money. And when Ronald Reagan threatened to reduce that amount of money, she went down the next day and registered as a Democrat and never voted for a Republican ever again. Ever. That was hers by divine right and providence. And anyone who threatens, so yeah, old people vote. And you start threatening Social Security and they will vote in huge numbers. So Social Security will be there for you. You know, we may have to do some enormous political backflips to get there, but it will be there in some form. You may have to wait until you're older to get it, right? Full retirement age for me is not 65. So, but it will be there unless we become like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome type situation. So these benefits, you know, that we have that are tangential are not as important for most people on the satisfaction. The one profession where they say that wages and those benefits are the most important, sales. Salespeople are highly motivated by money. They're highly motivated. Sales is the only profession, other than starting your own business, in which case you're going to be involved in sales, right? That you can set your own salary. You want to make more money as a salesperson? Work harder. My friend Adam Tucker, who works for US Foods, he's like, if I want to take my kids to Disney World this year, I just figured out how many more cases of meat I had to sell to do that, to get that done. Sales is the one. Most people look at these other goods, these psychic goods, satisfaction with their job, doing something creative, something that provides an identity of self-worth, achievement. We get self-esteem from doing a good job out of these things, and happiness. Work can be enormously creative and fulfilling. So the conventional views of work are, again, we have this sort of bipolar, manic depressive type view of work. The primary view has historically been negative. Work is something that, you know, it involves toiling. It's seen as awful. In the book Working by Studs Terkel, he says, you know, work is about ulcers and fights and kicking the dog. I mean, it's a catalog of horrors. And I will tell you that as you go through the world, you will at some point in time, if you haven't experienced this yet, you will have a bad boss. If you haven't experienced this yet, you will have one. I had one here at UCO. He came in and he told my boss and I that he was going to fire us. We didn't know what we were doing before he'd even met us. I'm going to fire you. You know, that was just the kind of person he was. He told everybody that, everybody in the division.
What did you say to that?
My response was, sir, with all due respect, I was here before you came and I will be here when you leave. And because I worked in the Office of Legal Counsel, we were the ones that got to tell him he was out the door. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I used to be the firing attorney in the Office of I was wonderful at it. I liked to fire people. Good. I was good at bringing the box. Here you go. Never could fire a faculty member, not the one that stabbed a student with a pencil. Couldn't do it.
So what happens?
Never got to fire a faculty
What
member.
happens when you have a bad boss, but you don't have the authority to say what you said? It's like, I don't think I'm gonna be a lawyer.
My response to that is that you need to, first of all, if you have a job, you can get another job, right? If you don't have a job, it may be hard to get a job. If you don't have a job, people wonder, particularly the longer you've been out. Now, there are ways you can explain it, right? Like if there's an economic downturn, everybody understands that the unemployment goes up and it's easy to get a job once employment returns to a position. Right now, anybody who wants a job, if you want a job and you don't have a job, there is something seriously wrong with you at this point. When we have 3% unemployment, there you can get a job. So my first recommendation is that when you have a boss, like, and his name, I'll tell you, it was Cornelius Wooten. He never stayed very long at any institution. And after he left here, they finally they looked at his resume and decided nobody's going to hire him. And he left. And the last time I look him up from time to time, just, because I would like to go tell him I'm still here. Guess what? Didn't leave. I've been gone for 30 years now, and I'm still. Although I don't know, maybe he's brighter than I was. He left this place, but my response is, you need to keep your job until you can get another job.
Right.
But you need to look for another job, and this is one of the reasons that it's important in a marketing ethics course, because what we try to do as marketers when we do internal marketing to our constituency is to try and recognize that you can't have bosses like that anymore. The conventional view in the 1980s, particularly when we had corporate downsizing, was that anybody could be replaced. Nobody was irreplaceable. It was predicated on this model of the Bavarian bureaucracy. So Max Weber is a German sociologist who studied the bureaucracy, and he said that the bureaucracy was the ideal form of organization. And the reason that it was an ideal form of organization was because of the three characteristics that he said that the bureaucracy had. First of all, he said that the bureaucracy was hierarchical in nature. So what does that mean? Well, we tend to think of it in terms of a pyramidal structure. So at the top, you have the CEO, right? And then below the CEO, you have, vice presidents of human resources, vice president of marketing, vice president of operations, vice president of finance, right? And then below them, you have directors. And then below them, the boxes get bigger. You get more and more boxes, not bigger. You get more and more boxes. Below directors, you have managers. This is sort of, and below managers, you may have supervisors. And then you get down here to the bottom of the pyramid, and you have a whole lot of little boxes, which these are the people that do the toiling and the work of the organization. And so Weber says that the ideal bureaucracy is the ideal form of organization because it's hierarchical. So these lower layers report up the chain of command until you get to the CEO, right? So it provides a nice flow. If you look at flow charts in an organization, they have this pyramidal structure. At the top, you have the CEO, and then it'll come off and it'll branch down from there, and you have the VPs, and then there's a bigger layer and a bigger layer and a bigger layer, right? So he said it has a hierarchy. The second characteristic of the bureaucracy that they were identified was that it was specialized. And then finally, that it was rule bound. And the reason that he says these characteristics make the ideal organization is that if you think about it, what do companies do? Companies, generally, the ones that are successful, by and large, although again in the 1980s they took a deviation from this, companies do things that they do well. They sell products, and the reason you survive is you sell products that you learn how to do well. When we started having massive amounts of mergers and acquisitions in the 1980s, you had companies that were gobbling up other companies that they didn't have a specialty in, and it didn't work very well. If you are, for example, Hewlett Packard, and you gobble up a firm that has, nothing to do with computers, this happened under Hewlett Packard when Carly Fiorina, who ran for president as a Republican, she's the one that Donald Trump made fun of. He made fun of her face, and I think it turned a lot of women off. But she was president. She was not terribly successful at this because she didn't really understand the culture of Hewlett Packard. She didn't understand what they did, and this idea of we can just gobble up everything and no, you should have some specialization. What is it that your organization does better than everybody else? What gives them the competitive advantage? One of the things that I think about, I love UCO, they pay my salary, but one of the things that I think we have to think about here at UCO is what was our competitive advantage? One of our competitive advantages now, this is a shameless plug for the program in which I teach, sales. We're the only one who have a sales major and minor in the state. Now, OSU's trying, God bless their heart, they're trying, right? And they're going to get there. They're trying to have a sales program. We're the only one. That gives us a competitive advantage in this field. But historically, what has been our competitive advantage? We've ceded it, and we need to think about this, in my opinion. Our competitive advantage in the marketplace historically was that we were cheap. We were very cost efficient. That's not necessarily true, and I think we ought to think about that. Like, why is it that we're losing students? Every time you raise tuition, there seems to be, an inverse relationship here. Maybe you want to think about these things. But so it's specialized, and they're rule bound. So we do what we do well. What is it UCO did well? Well, we provided quality, cheap education, and you can have those. You can have quality and cheap. It's hard. It's a balance, but you can have that, right? So we're specialized, and then we're rule bound. What does the rule bound get you? Well, it means that this person who's in this cell down here, they do a job and they have a task, and there shouldn't be a great deal. We should identify what that task is, and there shouldn't be a great deal of discretion. Now that gets harder the more kind of creative the business or enterprise that you're in is. And there's a recognition now that while rules are important, you also have to have some flexibility. But Weber says these are the three characteristics that identify a bureaucracy and that make them efficient, that make the bureaucracy efficient. You don't have, for example, if we think about bureaucracies in the federal government, the Federal Aviation Administration, I'm a commercial pilot, the Federal Aviation Administration doesn't investigate crime. They leave that to the FBI, right? That's the job of the Bureau of Investigations. They're specialized. They don't go outside their little realm. And that makes it efficient. What does the FAA do? They make sure that flying is safe. That when you board the airplane and get on a flight from Oklahoma City to Los Angeles, California, you're going to arrive intact. That's what the FAA does, right? It's highly specialized. So looking at this and thinking about these ideas, one of the things that we saw was that this doesn't allow for a lot of human fulfillment. And going back to your question about what do you do if you've got this kind of job? You keep the job until you can find something else that that allows you to have that. And there's now a recognition that we have to temper all of these things, because one of the things that we did, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, with these ideas of anybody can do the job. So Max Weber thought that what happens in these organizations is they function like a machine. If the cog in the machine isn't working, you pull it out and throw it away, and you replace it with another cog in the machine. That's what he viewed workers as. And this became a dehumanizing characteristic of even big business. It was like, this is your job, sit here 8 hours a day, and work. We now recognize that that doesn't work very well, particularly with people who have college degrees and have some intelligence, that we can't just view them as a cog in a machine. And yes, you can replace people, but at what cost?
So do you think that the hierarchy of work that you're talking about is like changing like rapidly with like employees now, like, requesting like a 3-day work week and like
Yes.
mental health days, and like they get more of a say and they get more control now?
I do think that. And I think that's because labor has more power right now vis-a-vis management than they did in the past. We've gone through periods, again, if you went back in time to the early industrial revolution, before we had labor unions, workers had very little power. And if you started agitating too much, they just locked you out. And they, and you worked in a company town, lots of companies had these. And if you worked in the company town, you lived in company housing. And when you decided you were going to agitate too much because you didn't want to, have your entire livelihood wrapped up in the company, they threw you out. And it wasn't so good for you. And then we had organized labor that sort of, fought back. They said, as individuals, we don't have a lot of rights, but if we come together and we collectively bargain, we can get more rights and we can get better benefits from our employer. And then, now, as a result of the fact that there's just a huge labor shortage, workers again have more rights to say things like, I'm not going to work 80 hours a week. I've got to have work-life balance, and demand those kinds of things. This idea that, yeah, you can replace any of these people, but at what cost? Particularly if you think about something like sales. If you lose a salesperson, how much is that costing you in revenue that they're not out there making you money? If you have to replace an ops person, I'll use something other than, like somebody who is part of the manufacturing or part of the production process. If it's, for example, like, computer codes, if they leave, how long is it going to take you to replace them and get somebody up to speed on what it was that they were doing? The cost estimates are, if you lose an employee, it can cost you anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times that employee's annual salary to replace them. Now, obviously, if we're talking about McDonald's employees, you're on the low end. It doesn't take very long to teach people, that a Big Mac is 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. Right? That just does not take very long to teach them that. No, not 1 patty. There's 3 slices of bread here, right?
Oh my word.
Gotta have 2 patties. Doesn't take very long. But if you're talking about anybody who, like say a computer programmer in ops, it could take a long time. And you're gonna, it's gonna cost you money to go out and recruit and find those people.
Aren't you typically hired back as a consultant as well?
A lot of times they will, yes. If you have a skill set. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of times if you're out of that field for very long, your skill set loses value.
You can charge them a lot more money.
Yeah, you can. When I actually went into the PhD program, I was I was executive vice president and chief general counsel of the American Education Corporation, and they hired me for a year to train. I was in the PhD program, and they paid me twice my annual salary for a year to get the guy who they hired, who knew nothing about education law or anything about what we did, to get him up to speed on what it was that we were doing. So yeah, you can. The second view, so you've got this primary view, negative, as proposed by Studs Terkel, about kicking the dog and making people just sort of this theory X view of work. What is theory X? view of work? Anybody know? You should have had this in management, hopefully, at some
Is that when
point.
we don't believe our workers are going to do what they're supposed to?
That's exactly it. Yeah, we don't believe, we believe that people are inherently lazy, that you have to ride them, you have to, make sure that they're doing what it is that you want them to do, because they're only motivated by carrots and sticks, and you're probably gonna have to use a lot more stick than carrot to get them to perform, right? On the other, the diametrically opposed view to that is theory Y, which says, people are inherently good and they want to perform and they want to do a good job and they find value in their work. Again, you probably have a synthesis model. It depends on where you are, right? If you're hiring, do you want fries with that? I'm not sure they're going to find a lot of joy in that. Although again, as I read essays, maybe I'd find a lot more joy in, do you want fries with that? Like, it's a yes or no question. I don't really have to think about it too hard, I start reading essays and I want to cry, and then I have a drink and, things are a little bit brighter and I become a little more charitable, by the time I've had 3 or 4, bourbon and branch, and we're off to the races and life is good again. So I wouldn't have to do that if I were working at McDonald's. So life would be simple for me.
Yeah, instead you drove for Keystone.
Maybe, yeah, right? So the human fulfillment model, what does this model propose? Well, that we can develop our fullest potential in work, that we can use work to build character. That's what most of you want. You want to go to work for someplace that allows you to develop and build character and develop your fullest potential. My mother can play several instruments. She's enormously artistic. I can't do that. I'm a tone deaf. I wanted to learn to sing, and I went to this person because, when karaoke first became popular, that was in my generation, that was like the big thing. Karaoke bars became popular. And let me tell you, I am like, if there's a karaoke bar anywhere around, I'm there. And I'm a tone deaf flat baritone. So I went to this woman who I was like, I want to learn to sing one song at karaoke really well. And she's like, oh no, you've got to learn musical theory and you've got to, and she's like, let's sit down at the piano and figure out where you are. And, after 10 minutes, she's like, you're a tone deaf flat baritone. Perhaps if I spent years with you, I could teach you to sing one song at karaoke really well. I'm like, that's what I wanted. One song, right? That's it. So, like, you can find meaning and value in this, in the human fulfillment model, and it's going to build character, versus the, this is just something we have to suffer through. So if we take this model and we look at the opposite of that model, which is this sort of theory X model, well, if we have a thesis, which is, human fulfillment, everything is sweetness and light, or actually we should probably say that the thesis was, the bad model, but let's say that we've got the human fulfillment model here as our thesis, the antithesis, which that's not antithesis, although I had a judge tell me that. I have a whole Oklahoman to English dictionary of things that I've been told by people, like, like he's like, well, it seems to me that I could take the antithesis position of your argument in this motion, Mr. Aguirre. And I'm like, antithesis? Yeah, the antithesis. That's pronounced antithesis. I had a judge tell me that the epitome of my case seemed to be the epitome.
Did you correct him?
What? I was like, He's like, E-P-I-T-O-M-E. I was like, what, Your Honor? And he's like, E-P-I-T-O-M-E, the epitome. That's pronounced epitome, right? It's pronounced epitome. Had a judge pronounce, like, when my cousin was getting married and they wanted a secular service, where's your fiancé? That's Oklahoman for fiance. So the antithesis is this, negative view of work, the hostile view, that it's just something that we have to endure. Then we could have a synthesis view of work. Which is the liberal model. What does this model say? Well, this model says that we can't all have meaningful work. Somebody still has to pick up the trash. But what we can do is we can make that human. We can make that humane. It's not about finding your bliss and climbing the mountain and, sitting in the lotus position and realizing the ultimate meaning of life under this model for everybody. But it's about allowing people to have dignified choices. It's about allowing for the freedom of choice, the ability to have some control over your environment. Recognizing that not everybody's going to be blissfully happy in their job, but providing them with human dignity. What are things like that that allow you to have human dignity even in, so we no longer, when I first served on city council in Guthrie, when I was first elected, we actually employed the trash men. We no longer do that. We now contract that out. It's all contracted out. They're no longer part of our organization. We pay somebody Laidlaw to come in and pick up that waste. Well, what does it mean? You're not going to get a whole lot of creativity in driving the truck around, but it's recognizing that people have certain needs and goods and recognizing that they may have value and that you should allow for things like, or at least consider things like workplace democracy, where people have the ability to participate, to make suggestions to their managers and have those suggestions heard. And that before you view them as a cog in the machine, that you allow them the dignity. For example, if you're going to engage in termination or punishment proceedings, things like due process in the workplace. Now, what does due process in the workplace look like? Well, the heart of due process, and this is something that companies should think about, the heartland of due process, even recognizing that there are these jobs that people are going to have to do that are not terribly fulfilling, is before you do things to people, that you provide them with notice and hearing. One of the reasons, there are people at Southwest Airlines who empty the trash, right? But Southwest employees live the brand. Why is it that Southwest has kind of gotten a bad rap in recent history because of the customer experience that has happened as a result of sort of the collapse of their customer service management system, which is antiquated and old. They have not invested in the technology to have a more modern system. And we've seen like people have literally started turning against Southwest, but that's not historically what Southwest has been. Southwest has been it's been the only airline, by the way, that has not gone through bankruptcy. And why is that? Because their employees live the brand, even the guy who's picking up the trash. And why is that? Because Southwest engaged in workplace democracy, where they give people notice and hearing. What does that mean? Well, let's think about it in a perspective that you can understand. If I accuse you, as I graded your exams, of using ChatGPT, how many of you have been using ChatGPT? Nobody's tried ChatGPT? If you haven't, I know my colleagues are going to be horrified that I say this. Literally, you should probably write your essay and then send it through ChatGPT and see which is better. Right? You can learn from this. You can learn from this artificial intelligence.
I talk to it every day.
You do? You talk to ChatGPT? Really? Are you serious?
Yeah, anytime I got a question, I don't Google it anymore. I just chat GPT it.
Yeah. Well, my sister-in-law who's in a PhD program, they're using ChatGPT. They use it to go out and find me articles on X. So it's doing literature reviews basically in a very efficient, and her doctoral advisor has said, if you're not using ChatGPT, you're an idiot. Because if you're doing these lit reviews the old way, which is you have to come up with search terms and things like that, and go out and try and scour the web for journal articles, that's just a horribly inefficient way of working. So she's using it to like compile lit reviews for academic papers. Now they're not using it to write the lit reviews, but they are using it to go out and find the information, right? So we've got this artificial intelligence that's capable of doing these things that you should, at least know what it is, because it's, the transforming the world. One of the YouTube channels that I follow is called Jolly. It's these two British guys, Josh and Ollie. I love them. Ollie deep faked Josh by using things like ChatGPT to come up with scripts so that they could insert, Josh into one of their videos. It's really kind of funny. I mean, you should watch that. It's a clever video that he did. He wrote an entire autobiography for Josh Carrot using like artificial intelligence and something like ChatGPT to come up with the whole thing. And now they're selling the book as part of their merch on their channel, which has actually allowed them to then donate that money to building a statue in Carrot Land. So Josh's last name is Carrot, and they visited Carrot Land, and so Ollie wrote this autobiography of Josh using artificial intelligence, then got it published, it sold on Amazon, and they made enough money off of it to build a monument to Josh in Carrot Land, which is in New Zealand. So, like these are interesting things that we can do. So this notice and hearing, let's suppose that as I read your essays, I thought you used ChatGPT and using, very sophisticated analyses and things like Turnitin.com and stuff. I was able to prove that you had deep faked your essay for the exam. And so I, want to throw you out of school. I used to do that too. I was the lawyer who sat in on all of when we throw students out of school. Those were fascinating.
What was the best one?
Absolutely fascinating. Well, a lot of them, I sat on the Title IX panels, which is like sexual harassment or sexual assault. So those were always very interesting to hear. I mean, the fact patterns were always just kind of crazy. So what would you want to have before I threw you out of here? Because I could do a lot of damage to you by putting this on your transcript that you're a big failure. What would you want to have? Well, you'd want to know what it is that you're being charged with, right? And you'd want to have an opportunity to defend yourself. Now, how much notice and hearing do you have to give? Well, that sort of depends on the severity of what you're talking about doing. What we should recognize is that even though not everybody can find these kumbaya moments in their job, that I can, for example. I mean, I find an enormous amount of joy in finding creative ways of making sure that you stay awake in my class that don't involve throwing erasers at your head or shooting you with my .357 Magnum because I have a concealed carry permit, right? And we all need to carry guns. I do have a gun. I do have a concealed carry permit. I don't carry on campus. That would be bad. I might be tempted. That would be bad.
What is the legality of that? Because I know with private establishments, if there's a
They
no
can
guns,
say no gun. Yeah, right. Like so.
it's more of a suggestion or a request than a law. The worst they can do is trespass you at like a Walmart.
Yeah. Generally speaking, in the state of Oklahoma, if they say don't bring a gun in here, don't. There are places where you just absolutely shouldn't carry a gun and it's illegal. Like, the bar. Like,
Yeah.
before you go get tanked up, you probably shouldn't be.
Any establishment where they
It's
ID
stolen.
you with the intent of alcohol, correct?
I don't think you should. Well, at restaurants you can carry them. There's alcohol there, but like bars generally shouldn't carry them there. We're not quite as fascinated as the state of Texas is, where you have to have like a specific sign and specific language,
Yeah.
and it has to be in both Spanish and English and all these other little requirements to try and make it, so that we all can carry our gun just about everywhere.
You can't possess marijuana and gun at the same time, correct?
I don't know. I would think that would be correct, although I don't know specifically.
There's a
Marijuana laws are really kind of like changing and evolving very quickly, because this is a whole new area of you know, development that we haven't had to think about before, but
marijuana is state and handguns are federal. So,
well, we also have state laws that regulate handguns and things like that.
well, but I'm saying like if you go through the OSBI, they have to do the federal background
Background
check.
check.
And because the marijuana distribution, like if you have a card, is state and the OSBI background check is gonna be federal, they don't talk. And it's basically like if you don't get caught with it.
Yeah, it's kind of a Wild West.
Yes.
Right, out there. I do know that, you know, if I were to get a medical marijuana card, which I don't have one, like that would be the end of my pilot's license.
Yeah.
They, that's it. You're gone. They take it.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's strict.
It's there's no fooling around with that. So what can we say? Well, we should have this idea of notice and hearing. We should have respect for autonomy, recognizing that people have a right to bodily autonomy, that they have a right to control their environment to a certain amount. Ideas of fair labor and fair pay. These are changing as a result of employees having more and more leverage over employers. They're paying $15 an hour at the Guthrie McDonald's to, you know, work at the drive-through as a result of the fact that employees are now capable of exercising a lot more control. Also, rights and duties that employers owe to employees. A respect for our employees. The idea that we have to have healthy and safe working facilities and conditions, and that we have to provide competent management for our employees. Any questions? All right, well, if you got ducks, come see me. If I asked you to come see me, and I will see you in a week.
Is the article review due on the 24th?
Whatever I have in the syllabus. I mean, I will extend it if you need time, since we had those weeks that we were absent.